A plausible peace for Ukraine. We regard the agreement signed last night, the Munich Agreement, and the Anglo-German naval agreement as symbolic of the desire of our two peoples to never go to war with one another again. Neville Chamberlain, British Prime Minister, September 1938. The Munich Agreement, which saw Britain and France abandon their treaty obligations to Czechoslovakia and allow it to be dismembered by Nazi Germany, is widely seen to be the ultimate act of appeasement, which directly led to World War II. In it, Chamberlain sought to give the Czech Sudetenland to Germany in return for Hitler's promise that this was his last demand for foreign territory in Europe. Land for peace is a frequent formula employed by diplomats and dictators for resolving armed conflict. If, as is the case with Israel and the Egyptian army after the Camp David Accords of 1978, such an agreement is made from a position of strength, the Israeli army had never lost a war, then it can be a basis for a long-term quelling of hostilities. If, however, it is a desperate act, born of weakness, it only whets the appetite of the predator. As Britain's great imperial poet Rudyard Kipling once wrote, "Once you have paid him the Danegeld, that is ransom, you'll never get rid of the Dane, that is the Viking raider." Giving in to a bully only encourages his ongoing threats. As a result of Russian dictator Putin's desperate gamble to seize Ukrainian territory, we are closer to an unrestricted global thermonuclear war than we have been since Khrushchev menaced the US by placing missiles in Cuba. As such a war would certainly erase human civilization and might possibly exterminate all life on Earth, this circumstance is of the utmost gravity. As if this wasn't consequential enough, Russia's Ukrainian invasion is merely a dress rehearsal for the greater danger of Red China invading the independent Republic of Taiwan. The butchers of Beijing are as weak domestically as the authoritarian Putin. Like him, Xi and his cohorts are tempted by the possibilities of unifying their captive population by launching a great patriotic crusade against the foreign outsiders. Every response that the Western world makes to Russia in the Ukraine will be weighed by the Chinese communists as they calculate the risk of crossing the Taiwan Strait in force. The West must resolve the Ukrainian war in a manner that does not encourage the Chinese to attack Taiwan, a strike that would involve the Communist Party of China in a shooting war with the United States of America on day one of such a conflict. Yet, there is a casual improvisation and blithe self-assurance in Western moves that belie the seriousness of this situation. Sending top-flight weapons to the Ukraine, the mysterious destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines, and other Western steps have created a proxy war in the Ukraine between the West and Russia. There is even consideration of accepting the Ukraine into NATO while the war still rages. This would place us at war with Russia. It's explosive. It is as if our leaders do not understand that Putin cannot be openly defeated without being assassinated by his domestic enemies. The same is true for China's communist captors. For them, these struggles can only result in victory or death. The human species has only survived nearly 90 years in the shadow of the H-bomb by assiduously preventing full-scale war between the nuclear powers. For many, it is easy to forget just how unlikely it was that the Soviet Union allowed itself to be overthrown without causing mushroom clouds to erupt over Western cities. We simply cannot be casual about the prospect of mutually assured destruction. Bearing in mind the terrible example of Munich and the terrifying prospect of atomic annihilation, I suggest that the West pursue an attainable peace settlement. The goal of this cannot be a total victory for anyone. Simultaneously, any settlement must deter any future westward aggression by the Russians and any aggression of any kind by the Chinese communists. The Ukraine's modern borders were set by Stalin in order to include significant Russian minorities in the Crimea, the Donets River Basin, and the East. This was in order to preserve great Russian control over their Ukrainian colony. The bitterest pill in such a peace that I advocate would be in granting Russia control over these areas. Nevertheless, it should be done, with the proviso that anyone wishing to leave could go west into what remains of the Ukraine. To compensate for this, as part of the peace settlement, the remaining Ukrainian territories should then be allowed within the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. If NATO member nations seriously meet their military funding obligations, this should guarantee the long-term security of the vast majority of Ukrainian territory. Further, a formal anti-Chinese communist alliance akin to NATO must be established, involving, among others, India, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and the United States. Such an alliance, which could be coupled with NATO, would make clear to the Chinese Communist Party that any attempt to conquer foreign territory like Taiwan will result in a war that they simply cannot win. The primary goal of such a peace would be to contain the aggressor nations with strong alliances. Most of the Ukraine would be protected, as would the future of all nations west of Russia. Being made from strength, such a peace would have more in common with Camp David than with Munich. As to Putin, his economy is in shambles, his domestic power damaged, and it is clearer than ever that he is a willing tool of the Chinese Communist Party. Even with annexing the Crimea, the eastern Ukraine, and the Donets River Basin, such a peace could not possibly be classified as a Russian victory. Unfortunately, it is not possible to pursue an utter Russian defeat given their nuclear arsenal. Such a peace, as I have suggested here, would have the virtue of diffusing a potential accidental launch of nuclear-tipped intercontinental ballistic missiles while shoring up structures that would plausibly counter future aggression.